The security monitor glowed in the darkness of Catherine Hayes's home office, casting pale blue light across her exhausted features. It was 11:47 at night, and she sat in the leather chair that had cost more than most people earned in a month, watching grainy footage from the camera she'd installed in her son's room 3 weeks ago. She told herself it was about safety, about monitoring the new driver she'd hired, about protecting her 16-year-old son, Daniel, who couldn't protect himself anymore. But the truth, the one she couldn't quite admit, even in the privacy of her own thoughts, was darker. She was checking to make sure the driver wasn't mistreating him, wasn't being rough, wasn't showing the same barely concealed frustration and pity that everyone else showed when they looked at the boy who used to run track, who used to laugh easily, who used to be holed out on the screen. Thomas Rivera moved with careful precision, lifting Daniel from the wheelchair with practiced ease. Catherine's breath caught. She'd watched this same scene 17 times over the past 3 weeks. 17 nights of Thomas staying long after his shift officially ended at 6 o'clock. 17 nights of him carrying her son like he weighed nothing, speaking to him in that low, gentle voice she could barely hear through the audio feed. "All right, buddy," Thomas was saying, settling Daniel onto the therapy mat she'd purchased 6 months ago and never seen anyone use. "Let's see if we can get a little further tonight. No pressure. We go at your pace." Daniel's voice came through thin and uncertain. "It's not going to work." "Nothing works?" "That's what you said last Tuesday," Thomas replied, kneeling beside him. "And then you held that leg extension for 12 seconds. Your record's 15. Want to try for 16? Catherine leaned closer to the screen. She had hired Thomas Rivera 6 weeks ago through an agency that specialized in medical transport drivers. His resume had been straightforward. Commercial driver's license, clean background check, 5 years of experience with special needs clients. The agency coordinator had mentioned he was very reliable and excellent with difficult cases. Catherine had barely looked at him during the interview. She'd been on a conference call with Singapore, reviewing quarterly projections while her assistant handled the formalities. She'd signed the contract without reading it, approved the salary without negotiating. She needed someone to drive Daniel to his twice-weekly physical therapy appointments and back. Someone who wouldn't quit after 3 weeks like the last 4 drivers had. She hadn't expected this that on screen, Thomas was guiding Daniel through leg exercises with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. His hands were gentle but firm, supporting without controlling, encouraging without forcing. He wore the same thing every night: faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, work boots that had seen better years. His dark hair was always slightly messy, and there were permanent shadows under his eyes that spoke of exhaustion that went bone deep. "There you go," Thomas said softly as Daniel's leg trembled with effort. "Feel that? That's your quad engaging. That's progress, man. That's real progress." "It hurts," Daniel whispered. "I know. Pain means the nerves are waking up. That's good pain. That's the kind that means your body's fighting." Catherine's throat tightened. She hadn't heard Daniel talk about pain in months. He'd stopped complaining, stopped hoping, stopped trying. The doctors had said the spinal injury from the car accident was permanent. 70% chance he'd never walk again. The remaining 30% required intensive therapy, experimental treatments, and most importantly, the will to fight. Daniel had lost that will 6 months ago, right around the time Catherine had stopped coming home before midnight. She watched Thomas help Daniel through another repetition, then another. 20 minutes passed. 30. At some point, Thomas pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then put it away. His daughter, Catherine assumed. She'd overheard him on the phone once, talking to someone named Sophia, telling her he'd be home soon, that her dinner was in the fridge, that she should brush her teeth and get ready for bed, that a single father working the late shift with a child waiting at home. The irony wasn't lost on Catherine. She was a single mother avoiding home, while a man who had every reason to rush away stayed late with her son. "Okay, buddy," Thomas finally said, checking his watch. "That's enough for tonight. You did great. Really great." "You don't have to lie," Daniel muttered. Thomas sat back on his heels, and something in his expression shifted. Catherine recognized that look. She'd seen it in the mirror on the worst days after Daniel's accident. Raw, unfiltered pain, quickly masked but unmistakable. "Daniel," Thomas said quietly, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen. 3 years ago, my wife Elena had a stroke. She was 32 years old, healthy, no warning. One morning she woke up and couldn't move the entire left side of her body. Catherine's hand moved to her mouth. The doctor said she'd never walk again either," Thomas continued. "So we should accept it, make accommodations, move on. But Elena, she was stubborn, and I was stubborn. So every night after I put our daughter to bed, I'd spend 2 hours helping Elena with exercises the insurance wouldn't cover. Leg lifts, arm rotations, balance work, all of it." Daniel had gone completely still. "It took 8 months, Thomas said. 8 months of pain and tears and nights when she begged me to stop, when she said it was pointless. But on month 8, she took 3 steps. Just 3, but they were hers." His voice cracked slightly. "She walked our daughter to the school bus stop 6 months later." "Where's she now?" Daniel asked softly. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "She passed away a year ago. Cancer, completely unrelated to the stroke. But those 18 months when she could walk again, when she could pick up Sophia, when she could dance in the kitchen while making breakfast, those were the best months of our lives. Worth every second of the fight." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Catherine's vision blurred. She hadn't known. The agency hadn't mentioned any of this. She'd hired a driver and gotten a widower who understood loss, who understood paralysis, who understood her son's despair because he'd lived through it himself. "I'm not lying to you, Daniel," Thomas said finally. "Your progress is real. Slow, but real. And if you want to keep fighting, I'll be here. Every night you want to try, I'll stay." "You don't have to do that," Daniel whispered. "You have your own daughter. You should be home. Sophia knows where I am. She knows I'm helping someone who needs it. That's what we do in our family. We show up." Thomas stood, offering his hand. "Come on, let's get you back to bed. Your mom should be home soon." Catherine's chest constricted. She was never home soon. She was always late, always in another meeting, always prioritizing the company she'd built over the son who needed her. She watched Thomas lift Daniel with that same careful strength, settling him into the wheelchair, adjusting the blanket across his lap. He said something that made Daniel almost smile. Almost. Then Thomas checked his watch again, grabbed his jacket from the chair, and headed for the door to Catherine's phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. "Board meeting moved to 7 a.m. tomorrow. Updated agenda attached." She stared at the message, then back at the security monitor. Thomas was gone. Daniel sat alone in his room, staring at the ceiling with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and something else. Something that might have been hope. Catherine made a decision. She closed her laptop, powered down the monitor, and stood. Her heels clicked against the marble floor of the hallway as she moved through the house that was too large, too empty, too much like a monument to success, and too little like a home. She paused outside Daniel's door, her hand on the handle. She hadn't been in his room for more than 5 minutes at a time in weeks. Always too busy, always rushing, always with her phone in hand and her mind somewhere else. She pushed the door open. Daniel looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "Mom!" "Hey, sweetheart." Catherine's voice came out softer than she'd heard it sound in months. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of his bed, something she hadn't done since he was small. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," he said carefully, watching her like she might disappear. "The usual." Thomas stayed late again. Daniel's expression shifted, guarded now. "Yeah, he does that sometimes." "What do you two do?" A pause. "Just exercises. Stretches. He talks to me about stuff." Catherine reached out and took her son's hand. It was larger than she remembered, no longer a little boy's hand, but not quite a man's either. Caught in between like everything else in his life right now. "I'm sorry," she said. Daniel blinked. "For what?" "For not being here. For not being the one helping you. For letting a stranger show more faith in your recovery than your own mother." The words came hard, scraping against years of professional composure. "For working while you were fighting alone." "Mom, I watched the security footage tonight," Catherine admitted. "I've been watching it for weeks. I installed cameras because I didn't trust the new driver, and what I found was someone doing what I should have been doing all along." Daniel's eyes went bright. "You've been spying on me?" "Yes." Catherine didn't flinch from it. "And what I saw was my son trying harder than I've seen him try in months, because someone finally believed he could." She squeezed his hand. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry I stopped believing." The tears came then, for both of them. Catherine pulled her son into her arms, careful of his limited mobility, and held him the way she hadn't held him since the night of the accident. He was 16, nearly grown, but in that moment he was still her boy. "I want to try," Daniel whispered against her shoulder. "Thomas says I can do it. He says it takes time, but I can do it." "Then we'll do it," Catherine said fiercely. "Together. I'll be here. You have work. Work can wait." She pulled back, looking into her son's eyes. "You can't. Not anymore." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The next morning, Catherine sat in her office at Hayes Industries, staring at Thomas Rivera's employment file. Her assistant had pulled it at 6:30, along with everything else the agency had on record. The facts were sparse. Thomas Rivera, 36 years old, former licensed physical therapist with credentials from UC San Francisco, specialized in spinal cord injury rehabilitation and post-stroke recovery. Worked at Memorial Hospital from 2012 to 2021. Employment gap, 2 years. Current employment: medical transport driver, part-time warehouse work, weekend maintenance at an apartment complex. Catherine picked up her phone and called the agency director. "Ms. Hayes," the woman answered warmly. "Is everything all right with Mr. Rivera? Has there been a problem?" "No problem," Catherine said. "I need to know why a licensed physical therapist is working as a driver." A pause. "I'm not sure I understand. His credentials. He has a master's degree in physical therapy. He worked at a major hospital. Why is he driving for $12 an hour?" The director's voice became more careful. Mr. Rivera's personal circumstances changed several years ago. He needed flexibility that hospital work couldn't provide. "We don't typically discuss employee backgrounds. I need to know," Catherine interrupted. "Not because I'm concerned about his work. Because I need to understand who's working with my son." Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Rivera's wife became ill 3 years ago. He took a leave of absence to care for her. When she passed, he had substantial medical debt and a young daughter. Hospital hours weren't compatible with single parenthood. He chose work that let him be present for his child. So he gave up his career. He chose his daughter. The director corrected gently. "From what I understand, he's been trying to save enough to recertify his license. It lapsed during his wife's illness, and the renewal process is expensive. But that's secondhand information." Catherine thanked her and ended the call. She sat in her executive chair, surrounded by the trappings of success. The floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The degrees on the wall from Stanford and Harvard. The awards and recognition from a dozen business publications naming her one of the most influential CEOs under 40. And she thought about a man who had given up everything that mattered professionally to be present for what mattered personally. She opened her laptop and pulled up the security footage from the previous night. She watched Thomas carry Daniel, watched him guide her son through exercises with expert precision, watch him offer encouragement that was rooted in real knowledge and hard-won experience. This wasn't just a driver being kind. This was a trained medical professional providing therapy her son desperately needed for free after hours while his own child waited at home. Catherine made several calls. By 10 o'clock, she had answers. Thomas worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. His daughter Sophia was 9 years old, attended public school, and spent most evenings in an after-school program until Thomas could pick her up at 7. His medical debt from his wife's treatment was substantial, nearly $80,000, with garnished wages taking a chunk of every paycheck. His recertification for his physical therapy license would cost approximately $6,000 in fees, courses, and examination costs. He lived in a small apartment in a neighborhood Catherine's security team had flagged as higher risk. His car was 15 years old. His credit score showed someone who paid bills on time despite having nothing left over. And every night he stayed late with her son, giving him professional-level therapy worth hundreds of dollars per session, asking for nothing in return. Catherine closed the file and stood at her window, looking out at the city but seeing nothing. She had spent the last year building Hayes Industries into a powerhouse. She'd acquired 3 smaller companies, expanded into international markets, and increased shareholder value by 47%. She'd been featured in Forbes, interviewed on CNBC, invited to speak at conferences around the world. And while she'd been building her empire, her son had been dying inside, and a stranger had been saving him. Not a stranger, she corrected herself. A father who understood loss. A professional who saw a boy in need. A man with every reason to rush home to his own child, but who chose to stay anyway. Catherine pulled out her phone and scrolled to the contact information the agency had provided. She typed a message, deleted it, typed another. Finally, she settled on, "Mr. Rivera, this is Catherine Hayes. Would you be available to meet with me tomorrow morning before your shift? There's something I'd like to discuss. It's about Daniel." The response came 20 minutes later. "Of course. What time works for you?" 7 a.m. "My home office that I'll be there." Catherine set down her phone. She had no idea what she was going to say to him. No idea how to thank someone for doing what she should have been doing all along. No idea how to bridge the gap between the CEO who signed his paychecks and the mother who owed him everything. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Thomas Rivera had given her son something priceless: hope. The least she could do was understand why. That evening, Catherine came home at 6:30. Not midnight. Not 10. 6:30, while the sun was still setting, painting gold across the windows that Thomas's car was in the driveway. She could hear voices from Daniel's room as she walked through the house. She paused in the hallway, just listening. "Think we could try standing tomorrow?" Daniel was asking. "If you want to," Thomas replied. "But we're not rushing. Your body tells us when it's ready, not the calendar. My mom talked to me last night, after you left. She said she's been watching the cameras." Catherine held her breath. "Is she upset?" Thomas's voice was careful. "No." She was crying. She said she was sorry for not being here. A pause. "I think she might actually mean it this time." "Parents make mistakes too, Daniel. What matters is what they do next." "Did your daughter forgive you?" "For not being around when her mom was sick." Sophia was 6 when Elena got sick. She didn't understand most of it. "But yeah, we've talked about it as she's gotten older. She knows I did the best I could." Thomas's voice went softer. "Some days she's angry. Some days she misses her mom, so much it breaks both our hearts. But we show up for each other. That's what family does." Catherine stepped back from the door, her hand pressed against her mouth. She walked to her office, closed the door, and let herself feel the full weight of her failure. She had almost lost Daniel. Not to the accident, not to the paralysis, but to her own absence. To the belief that providing financially was the same as being present emotionally. To the lie that success at work could compensate for failure at home. Thomas Rivera had shown her the truth. And tomorrow morning, she would face him and figure out what came next. The sun set outside her window. For the first time in months, Catherine didn't open her laptop. She didn't check her email. She didn't review quarterly projections or market analyses. She simply sat in the silence of her too-large house and waited for her son's driver to finish giving her son the care she should have been providing all along. When Thomas finally emerged from Daniel's room at 8:15, he nearly walked into Catherine in the hallway. "Ms. Hayes," he said, startled. "I didn't realize you were home." Catherine studied him in person for the first time with real attention. The tired eyes, the careful posture, the faded jacket that had been mended at the elbow. He held his car keys in one hand, ready to leave, ready to rush home to his own child. "Thank you," she said simply, "for staying with him, for helping him." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "It's no trouble. Daniel's a good kid. It's after 8. Your daughter's waiting. Sophia understands." But his eyes flickered toward the door, betraying his worry. "Go," Catherine said gently. "Be with her. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 7. Thomas nodded and moved past her, but paused at the door. "Ms. Hayes, Daniel's making real progress. He just needs consistency. And someone who believes in him." "I know," Catherine said quietly. "I'm going to do better." Thomas met her eyes for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. Because he nodded once and left, Catherine walked to Daniel's room. Her son was lying in bed, exhausted but with color in his cheeks she hadn't seen in months. "Thomas just left," she said. "I know. He always checks that I'm settled before he goes." Daniel looked at her. "You're home early again." "I'm going to be home early from now on." Catherine sat on the edge of his bed, taking his hand. "Tell me about the exercises. Tell me what Thomas has you doing." And for the first time in 6 months, Catherine listened to her son talk about hope instead of despair, about progress instead of pain, about a future that might include walking again instead of the certainty that he never would. Outside, Thomas Rivera drove through the darkening streets toward his daughter, toward the small apartment, toward the life he'd rebuilt from ashes. He didn't know that the woman who employed him had been watching him for weeks. Didn't know that tomorrow morning would change everything, that he only knew that a boy needed help, and he had the skills to give it, and that was reason enough to stay. Some people counted their worth in dollars. Thomas Rivera counted his in moments like these. In Daniel's trembling leg holding a stretch 5 seconds longer than yesterday. In the hope returning to a teenager's eyes. In the knowledge that he was honoring Elena's memory by giving another family the miracle she'd fought so hard to achieve. He thought of his wife as he drove, the way he always did. Thought of her stubborn determination, her fierce love, her refusal to accept defeat even when her body betrayed her. "I hope I'm doing this right, mi amor," he whispered to the empty car. "I hope this is what you'd want." The city lights blurred past. Somewhere ahead, Sophia waited for him, probably already in her pajamas, probably having eaten the dinner he'd left in the fridge. 9 years old and already so independent, so understanding, so much stronger than any child should have to be. He'd given up his career for her. Walked away from hospital prestige and a salary that would have erased their debt in a few years. Because she needed a father more than the world needed another physical therapist. But some nights, late and exhausted and wondering if they'd make rent, Thomas wondered if he'd made the right choice. If Sophia would grow up resenting the poverty, the struggle, the sacrifices. Then he thought of Daniel's face tonight, the way the boy's eyes had lit up when he'd managed to hold that leg extension for 18 seconds. Thought of Elena in their kitchen, dancing while making pancakes 18 months after doctors said she'd never walk, that he'd made the right choice. Every time. Thomas pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, the building showing its age in peeling paint and cracked concrete. But the lights were on in his third-floor window, and he could see Sophia's silhouette moving past the curtain home. Not much, but he climbed the stairs, unlocked the door, and stepped into warmth. "Poppy." Sophia launched herself at him, all wild curls and bright eyes. "You're late." "I know, mi cielo. I'm sorry." He scooped her up, marveling that she was getting too big for this, but refusing to stop while she still let him. "Were you good?" "Always." She grinned. "I finished my homework and practiced piano and washed my dish." "That's my girl." He set her down, ruffling her hair. "Teeth brushed." "Not yet. Go. I'll check your homework after." She scampered off to the bathroom, and Thomas stood in their small living room, letting the tension of the day drain away. The apartment was tidy, the furniture secondhand but clean, the walls covered in Sophia's artwork and photos of Elena. This was what mattered. Not prestige, not career, not success by anyone else's definition. This. Her. Them. Thomas walked to the small table where Sophia had left her homework and smiled. Perfect scores on her spelling test, creative answers on her reading questions, careful penmanship that Elena would have been so proud of. "Poppy." Sophia appeared at his elbow, toothbrush in hand. "Is the boy you helped getting better?" "Yeah, mi amor. He's getting better." "Good." She hugged his waist. "Mommy would be happy you're helping him." Thomas's throat tightened. "I think she would be too." "I'm happy too," Sophia whispered. "Even when you're late." Thomas knelt down, pulling her into a proper hug. "I love you, Sophia Elena Rivera, more than anything in this world." "I know, Poppy. I love you too." Some things, Thomas thought as he held his daughter close, were worth every sacrifice, every struggle, every late night, and early morning and moment of doubt. Tomorrow he'd meet with Catherine Hayes, and whatever she wanted to discuss, he'd face it the way he faced everything else, with honesty, dignity, and the quiet knowledge that he'd done the right thing. For Daniel. For Sophia. For Elena's memory. for the belief that showing up mattered more than anything else. Thomas arrived at the Hayes estate at 6:50 the next morning, 10 minutes early, because showing up late to meet with the woman who signed his paychecks seemed like professional suicide. The gate opened automatically as his 15-year-old Honda approached, and he drove up the long driveway, feeling increasingly out of place. The house wasn't just large. It was a statement. Modern architecture, all glass and clean lines, perched on a hillside with views of the city below. The kind of place featured in magazines, not the kind of place where people actually lived. Thomas parked his aging car next to Catherine's sleek Mercedes and tried not to think about the contrast. Catherine opened the door before he could knock, dressed in business casual attire that probably cost more than his monthly rent. But her expression was softer than he'd seen before, less of the polished CEO and more of something human underneath. "Mr. Rivera, thank you for coming." She stepped aside. "Please come in." Thomas followed her through a foyer that could have held his entire apartment, past abstract art that he vaguely recognized as expensive, into a home office that managed to be both impressive and somehow cold. Everything was perfect, curated, intentional. Nothing was lived in. "Coffee," Catherine offered, gesturing to a sleek machine that looked more complicated than his car's engine. "No, thank you." Thomas remained standing, uncertain. "You said you wanted to discuss Daniel?" Catherine nodded, moving to her desk, but not sitting behind it. Instead, she perched on the edge, a gesture that felt deliberately less intimidating. "I've been watching the security footage from Daniel's room for the past 3 weeks." Thomas's stomach dropped. "I can explain. You've been staying 2 to 3 hours past your scheduled shift every night," Catherine continued, "providing what appears to be professional physical therapy to my son. Exercises, stretches, mobility work, all without billing for the additional time or asking for compensation." Thomas chose his words carefully. "Daniel needed help. I have the training. It seemed like the right thing to do. You have a master's degree in physical therapy from UC San Francisco. It wasn't a question. You worked at Memorial Hospital for 9 years, specializing in spinal cord injury rehabilitation. You let your license lapse 3 years ago, and you're currently working 3 jobs to support your daughter and pay off medical debt from your late wife's treatment." The color drained from Thomas's face. "How did you?" "I called the agency. I made inquiries." Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. "I needed to understand who was working with my son. What I found was a highly trained medical professional doing work worth thousands of dollars, for free, while his own child waits at home." Thomas felt exposed, stripped bare. "Ms. Hayes, if this is about liability, I can stop. I shouldn't have overstepped. I just thought." "I'm not asking you to stop," Catherine interrupted gently. "I'm asking you why you're doing it." The question hung in the air. Thomas looked at this woman, this CEO who lived in a house that could hold 10 families, who ran a company worth millions, who had everything except time for her own son. And he decided to tell her the truth. "Because 3 years ago, I watched my wife learn to walk again," he said quietly. "The doctors said it was impossible. They said we should accept her limitations, make peace with a wheelchair, move on. But Elena refused. And I had the training to help her, so I did." Catherine listened without interrupting. "Every night after our daughter went to sleep, I'd spend 2 hours putting Elena through exercises. Range of motion, strength training, balance work. All the things insurance wouldn't cover, that we couldn't afford to pay for privately." Thomas's voice grew rough. "It took 8 months. 8 months of pain and setbacks and nights where she cried and begged me to stop torturing her. But then she took 3 steps. And 6 months after that, she was walking our daughter to the bus stop." "Your wife passed away a year ago," Catherine said softly. "Cancer, completely unrelated to the stroke." Thomas managed a sad smile. "But those 18 months when she could walk, when she could dance in the kitchen and carry Sophia to bed and feel like herself again, those were worth everything. Worth every second of the fight." He met Catherine's eyes directly. "When I see Daniel, I see Elena. I see a person everyone's given up on, including himself. And I see someone who might walk again if someone just refuses to give up on him. So yeah, I stay late. I give him therapy I'm not being paid for, because I know it's possible, and I can't walk away from that knowledge." Catherine's composure cracked. Her eyes went bright, and she looked away, blinking rapidly. When she spoke again, her voice was thick. The accident was my fault. Thomas said nothing, letting her find the words. Not literally. A drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned us. But I was driving. I was on a conference call using Bluetooth, discussing a merger in Europe. Daniel was in the passenger seat, tried to tell me about something that happened at school, and I kept shushing him because the call was important. She laughed bitterly. The call was so important. She pressed her palms against her eyes. I saw the truck coming. Had maybe 2 seconds. In that moment, I could have swerved right and taken the impact on my side. But I froze, and the truck hit Daniel's door instead. Ms. Hayes. He was in the hospital for 6 weeks. 3 surgeries. Shattered vertebrae, damaged spinal cord. And every single day he asked when he could go home, when he could go back to school, when he could run track again. And I had to watch the hope drain out of him piece by piece. Catherine dropped her hands, and her face was raw with grief. I threw myself into work because I couldn't face what I'd done. Couldn't sit in that house and look at my son in a wheelchair knowing I could have prevented it. So I worked 80, 90-hour weeks, telling myself I was providing for him, securing his future. But really I was just hiding. You were surviving, Thomas said quietly. Guilt doesn't follow a reasonable schedule, Ms. Hayes. You do what you need to do to get through each day. But you didn't hide, Catherine countered. You lost your wife, and you still showed up for your daughter. You gave up your career to be present for her. I had to. Thomas's voice was firm. Sophia was 6 when Elena got sick. She didn't understand why Mommy couldn't play anymore, why I was always tired, why everything changed. After Elena died, Sophia was all I had left, and I was all she had. I couldn't sacrifice her childhood for a career, no matter how much I loved the work. Catherine stood, moving to the window. The morning sun painted gold across the valley below. I've built an empire. Hayes Industries is worth $800 million. We employ 1,200 people across 6 states. I've been on the cover of Forbes twice. And my 16-year-old son spent 6 months believing he'd never walk again because his mother was too cowardly to sit with him through his pain. She turned back to Thomas. Then you arrived. A driver I barely looked at during the interview. And somehow, you've given him more in 6 weeks than I've given him in 6 months. You've given him hope. I've given him therapy, Thomas corrected gently. You gave him life. You're his mother. That matters more than anything I can do. Does it? Catherine's voice broke. Because last night was the first time in months I've heard him talk about the future instead of just surviving the present. The first time he's mentioned college or track or anything beyond next week. That's because of you. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Ms. Hayes, why am I here? What do you want from me? Catherine returned to her desk and picked up a folder. I want to offer you a job. Not as a driver. As Daniel's private physical therapist, working from this house. Full-time position, comprehensive benefits, salary of $90,000 annually. Thomas's breath caught. I can't accept that. Why not? Because it's not real. It's charity dressed up as employment. Thomas's voice was firm but respectful. You feel guilty, and you want to fix everything with money. But I don't need rescuing, Ms. Hayes. I need steady work that lets me provide for my daughter with dignity. This isn't charity, Catherine insisted. You have the exact qualifications my son needs. You've already been providing the service. I'm simply asking you to do it officially, at a salary that's twice what most physical therapists make for a single client working from his home. Thomas shook his head. That's not a job. That's guilt money. The words hung harsh between them. Catherine flinched but didn't deny it. You're right, she said finally. Part of this is guilt. Part of this is me trying to buy back what I've lost. But part of it, Mr. Rivera, is genuine recognition of your value. You've been doing professional work for free. That's exploitation, even if it's self-imposed. Letting that continue would be wrong. Thomas rubbed his face, exhausted. I appreciate the offer. Really, but I can't take a job that exists just because you watched me on a camera and felt bad. Then what would you accept? Catherine asked. Tell me what would feel right to you. Thomas considered. Pay me properly for the hours I actually work. Therapy rate, not driver rate. But keep me as a driver first. Daniel needs consistency, not a revolving door of specialists. And I need flexibility to pick up Sophia from school and be there when she needs me. That's significantly less than what I'm offering. It's what's fair, Thomas replied. I don't need to be saved, Ms. Hayes. I just need to be respected. Catherine studied him for a long moment. Here was a man who'd lost everything, who worked 3 jobs, who had every reason to grab the financial lifeline she was offering. And he was refusing it because it didn't align with his principles. You're a stubborn man, Mr. Rivera. I learned from my wife. Elena once turned down a motorized wheelchair because she said it felt like giving up, even though walking exhausted her. Stubborn runs in my family. Despite everything, Catherine smiled. All right, we'll do it your way. Driver salary plus therapy rate for documented hours. No charity, just fair compensation for skilled work. Thomas exhaled slowly. Thank you. But I have one condition, Catherine added. I want to be involved, not just watching on cameras. Actually present, learning what you're doing, helping where I can. Daniel needs his mother, not just his therapist. Something in Thomas's expression softened. He'd like that. He talks about you, you know. Misses you. Catherine's eyes went bright again. He does. Every session. Mom used to make this joke. Or Mom would laugh at this, or I wish Mom was here to see this. You're not as absent from his heart as you think, Ms. Hayes. You're just absent from his room. The words were gentle, but landed like stones. Catherine pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. I'll be there tonight, she managed. When you work with him, I want to be there. Good, Thomas said simply. Then he checked his watch. I should get going. I need to drop Sophia at school before my shift starts. Mr. Rivera, wait. Catherine pulled out her phone, typed quickly. I'm sending you an email. There's a scholarship fund Hayes Industries runs for employees' children. Sophia qualifies. It covers after-school programs, tutoring, enrichment activities. It's not charity, she added quickly, seeing his expression. It's an employee benefit. You've worked for me for 6 weeks. You're entitled to it. Thomas opened his mouth to refuse, then stopped. Thought of Sophia spending every evening in the basic after-school program because he couldn't afford anything better. Thought of the piano lessons she'd asked about, the art class her teacher recommended, all the things he'd had to say no to. I'll look at the information, he said finally. Not agreement, but not refusal either. Catherine nodded, understanding the compromise. Drive safely, Mr. Rivera. I'll see you this afternoon. Thomas left, his mind spinning. The morning hadn't gone how he'd expected. He'd anticipated termination, or at minimum a lecture about overstepping boundaries. Instead, he'd found a mother drowning in guilt, trying to find her way back to her son. He understood that better than she knew. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. That afternoon, Catherine Hayes did something she hadn't done in months. She cleared her calendar. Every meeting, every call, every commitment from 3 o'clock onward was rescheduled or delegated. Her assistant stared at the instructions with undisguised shock. Are you ill? Margaret asked. No, Catherine replied. I'm going home. At 2:45, she walked out of her office, ignoring the surprised looks from her executive team. She drove home through afternoon traffic, her heart hammering with anxiety she couldn't quite name. What if Daniel resented her presence? What if she made things worse? What if 6 months of absence couldn't be repaired by a few hours of attention? She pulled into the driveway at 3:20, just as Thomas's Honda arrived with Daniel in the passenger seat. Her son looked surprised to see her car. Thomas helped Daniel into his wheelchair with practiced efficiency, the same careful strength Catherine had watched on camera for weeks. But seeing it in person was different, more real, more humbling. Mom, Daniel's voice carried confusion and a fragile hope. What are you doing home? I'm here to help, Catherine said, moving toward them. If that's okay with you. Daniel glanced at Thomas, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. Yeah, that'd be okay. They moved into the house together, an awkward triangle of uncertainty. Catherine had been in Daniel's room 1,000 times, but entering it now felt like trespassing. This was his space, the place where he'd been fighting battles she'd ignored. Thomas set up the therapy mat with quiet efficiency. Okay, Daniel. Same routine as yesterday. We'll start with range of motion, then move to resistance work if you're feeling up to it. I'm up for it, Daniel said with determination that made Catherine's chest ache. Ms. Hayes, Thomas said, if you'd like to help, you can support Daniel's leg here while I work the knee joint. Just hold steady. Let me do the movement. Catherine knelt beside her son, placing her hands where Thomas indicated. Daniel's leg was thinner than she remembered, muscle wasted from months of inactivity. The reality of his condition hit her harder than any doctor's report ever had. That's good, Thomas said quietly, guiding Daniel's knee through careful flexion. Feel that stretch, Daniel? That's your hamstring waking up. Hurts, Daniel gritted out. I know. Pain means progress. Your nerves are firing. Your muscles are engaging. That's good pain. Catherine watched Thomas work, saw the knowledge and skill in every movement. This wasn't just kindness. This was expertise applied with precision and care. Ms. Hayes, you can apply gentle pressure here. Thomas indicated a point on Daniel's thigh, just enough to engage the muscle. Feel that. Catherine felt the slight tremor under her palm, the muscle trying to activate. Yes, that's Daniel doing the work. He's fighting for every millimeter. Been fighting like this for weeks. Daniel's face was flushed with effort, sweat beading on his forehead. Catherine saw what she'd been missing. The incredible effort her son had been making, alone, with only this stranger-turned ally to witness and encourage. You're doing so well, sweetheart, she whispered, surprising herself. Daniel's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Tentative, fragile, but real. They worked for 40 minutes. Catherine's knees ached from kneeling on the floor, her arms tired from holding positions. But she didn't complain, didn't check her phone, didn't think about the emails piling up in her inbox. She simply stayed, present, witnessing her son's fight. Okay, Thomas said finally, that's enough for today. You did great, Daniel. Really great. Tomorrow we'll try standing with support. Standing. Daniel's voice cracked with hope and fear. Just for a few seconds, with me and your mom on either side. But yes, standing. I think you're ready. After they'd settled Daniel back into bed, Catherine walked Thomas to the door. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Thank you, she said quietly. Not just for helping Daniel, for letting me help too. He needs you there, Thomas replied. My skill can only do so much. His will to fight, that has to come from somewhere deeper. Having his mom believe in him, that's fuel nothing else can provide. I missed so much. So start now. That's all any of us can do. Thomas pulled out his keys. I need to get Sophia. I'll be back tomorrow, same time. Mr. Rivera, Catherine said as he reached his car. Your daughter, Sophia. Would she like to come here sometimes? After school? We have a pool, a game room, plenty of space. Daniel could use the company, and it might be easier than you picking her up, driving here, then home again. Thomas paused, his hand on the car door. Catherine saw him weighing it, testing for charity, searching for hidden obligation. Just a thought, she added quickly. Daniel mentioned being lonely, and I imagine 9-year-olds get bored in after-school programs. But no pressure. I'll ask her, Thomas said finally. See what she thinks. It was a small yes, conditional and careful. But it was a yes. That night, Catherine sat with Daniel after dinner, something she hadn't done in months. They didn't talk about the accident or the therapy or the future. They just watched a movie together, Daniel in his wheelchair beside her chair, their hands occasionally brushing as they shared popcorn. Halfway through, Daniel said quietly, I'm glad you were there today, Mom. Catherine squeezed his hand. I'm going to be there every day from now on. I promise. You can't promise that. You have work. Work can adjust, Catherine said firmly. You're more important. Daniel looked at her, searching for truth. Whatever he found satisfied him, because he relaxed slightly, leaning into her shoulder. They stayed like that until the movie ended, and Catherine realized she'd missed this. Missed her son. Missed simplicity. Missed the feeling of being needed for something that mattered more than quarterly earnings. Upstairs in her office, the security monitor remained dark. She didn't need to watch cameras anymore. She'd been there. She'd seen everything with her own eyes, felt it with her own hands. The next afternoon, Thomas arrived with Sophia. The little girl had her father's dark eyes and a wild mass of curly hair that refused to be tamed. She clutched a worn stuffed elephant and looked around the grand foyer with open wonder. "Poppy," she whispered, "do princesses live here?" Thomas laughed. "No, mi cielo, just regular people." Catherine appeared from the living room, having heard the door. She'd been anxious about this meeting all day, unsure how to interact with a 9-year-old, especially this particular 9-year-old whose father she was beginning to understand was extraordinary. "You must be Sophia," Catherine said, crouching to the girl's level. "Your father has told me wonderful things about you." Sophia studied her with the frank assessment of childhood. "Are you the lady whose son my Poppy is helping?" "Yes, I am. His name is Daniel. He's 16. "That's old," Sophia said seriously. "Is he nice?" "Very nice. A little shy, but very nice. Would you like to meet him?" Sophia looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay." Daniel was in the living room, having maneuvered his wheelchair there with growing independence. When he saw Sophia, his expression shifted from nervous to curious. "Ah," he said. "I'm Daniel. I'm Sophia Elena Rivera," she announced with formal precision. "I'm 9. My Poppy says you're learning to walk again." Daniel blinked at her directness. "Yeah, maybe. We're trying. My mommy learned to walk again, too," Sophia said, moving closer. "After her brain got hurt. Poppy helped her every day, and she got better." Her face fell slightly. "But then she got different sick and went to heaven." "I'm sorry," Daniel said quietly, with the understanding of someone who'd touched grief himself. "It's okay. She's not in pain anymore." Sophia held up her elephant. "This was hers. Poppy gave it to me, so I'd always have a piece of her." Catherine watched the exchange, her throat tight. This child had lost her mother, had watched her father sacrifice everything, had grown up too fast in too many ways. And yet she stood there with innocent confidence, offering her story without shame. "Do you want to see my room?" Daniel asked. "I have some games and stuff." "Okay." Sophia's face brightened. As Daniel wheeled toward his room with Sophia skipping beside him, chattering about school and her piano lessons and her stuffed elephant adventures, Catherine and Thomas stood in the living room, watching them go. "She's beautiful," Catherine said softly. "You've raised an incredible daughter." "Elena did most of the heavy lifting," Thomas replied. "I'm just trying not to mess up what she started." "You're succeeding." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two parents watching their children form an unexpected connection. "I looked in the scholarship fund," Thomas said finally. "Sophie is enrolled in an art class starting next week. She's been asking to take art for 2 years." "Thank you." "It's not charity," Catherine reminded him gently. "It's a benefit you've earned." "I know, but still." "Thank you." From Daniel's room came the sound of laughter. Real laughter, the kind Catherine hadn't heard from her son in months. Sophia's high giggle and Daniel's deeper chuckle blending together. "They're good for each other," Catherine observed. "Kids usually are," Thomas agreed. "They don't carry all the complicated stuff adults do. They just see each other and decide to be friends. I wish it was that simple for the rest of us." Thomas glanced at her. "Maybe it could be. Maybe we just make it complicated when it doesn't need to be." Catherine considered this. Considered the man beside her, who'd lost everything and built a life anyway. Who'd given up prestige for presence, career for family, ease for principle. Who'd shown her what mattered and asked for nothing in return. "Mr. Rivera." "Thomas," he interrupted gently. "If we're going to be working together, doing this together, it should probably be Thomas and Catherine. Unless that's too informal." "No," Catherine said, surprised by how much she liked the sound of her name in his voice. "No, that's fine. Thomas." He smiled, and she saw past the exhaustion, past the worn clothes and the weight of responsibility. She saw someone who'd been broken and put himself back together. Someone who knew what mattered and lived accordingly. Someone she was beginning to admire more than anyone she'd met in years. "Catherine," Thomas said, and she liked that too, liked the way he said it with respect but not distance. "I think we're going to be good at this. Helping them, I mean, Daniel and Sophia. Between the two of us, they've got a real shot." "At what?" "At being okay. At believing the world isn't entirely made of hard things. At hope." Catherine thought about that, about hope, about the future, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, broken things could be repaired. Yeah, she said softly. I think we are. In Daniel's room, Sophia was showing him how to draw an elephant, her small hands guiding his larger ones through the shapes. Daniel was laughing at his attempt, which looked more like a lumpy potato than any elephant. You'll get better, Sophia assured him. Art is like walking. You just have to practice. Did your dad teach you that? My mommy did. She said everything worth doing is worth doing badly at first, because that's how you learn to do it good. Daniel smiled. For the first time in months, he felt something like normal. Like maybe this wasn't the end of everything. Like maybe there were still moments worth having. The sun set outside, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Two families, broken by loss and circumstance, were beginning to find their way towards something new. Not perfect, not easy, but possible. And sometimes, possible was enough. 3 weeks later, everything fell apart on a Tuesday. Catherine was in her office when her phone rang. Not her work line, her personal cell. Thomas's number. Ms. Hayes, Catherine, I need to cancel today's session. His voice was tight, controlled, but barely. I'm at the hospital with Sophia. Catherine's heart stopped. What happened? She collapsed at school. They think it's her heart. She was born with a minor defect. Nothing serious, but his voice cracked. They're running tests now? I don't know how long I'll be. Don't worry about Daniel, Catherine said immediately. Focus on your daughter. Do you need anything? Should I come? No, I needed to let you know. He paused. Tell Daniel I'm sorry. The line went dead. Catherine stared at her phone, her mind racing. She thought of Sophia's bright smile, her wild curls, the way she'd drawn elephants with Daniel just days ago. She thought of Thomas losing Elena, facing the possibility of losing his daughter too. She made a decision. 20 minutes later, Catherine walked into St. Vincent's Hospital. She found Thomas in the pediatric waiting area, his head in his hands, still wearing his work uniform. He looked up when she approached, confusion crossing his face. You didn't have to come, he said. Yes, I did. Catherine sat beside him. What did the doctors say? Her heart defect is worse than they thought. She needs surgery. Soon. Thomas's hands were shaking. But my insurance doesn't cover it. Not fully. I'm looking at $70,000 out of pocket minimum. I don't have $70,000. I don't have $7,000. Catherine's throat tightened. Thomas, I can take out loans. Sell everything. Figure something out. He was talking faster now, spiraling. I've done it before. When Elena was sick, I figured it out. I'll figure this out too. Let me help. No. Thomas stood abruptly. I can't take your money. I won't. This isn't about pride. It's exactly about pride. His voice rose, drawing looks from other families. He lowered it, anguished. Don't you understand? If I take your money, what am I? Just another person you saved with your wealth. I need to be more than that. For Sophia's sake, for my own. Catherine stood to face him. What you are is Sophia's father. And right now, she needs you to accept help. Not for your pride, but for her life. Thomas's composure shattered. He covered his face, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Catherine did something she'd never done with an employee. She pulled him in her arms and held him while he broke. I can't lose her too, he whispered against her shoulder. I can't. She's all I have left of Elena. She's everything. You won't lose her, Catherine said fiercely. We won't let that happen. The surgery was scheduled for Friday. Catherine paid the hospital directly, structuring it as an advance on Thomas's salary with a repayment plan that would take him decades at current rates. It was the only way he'd accept it. Thursday night, Thomas came to see Daniel. He looked hollowed out, running on nothing but fear and coffee. How is she? Daniel asked immediately. Scared, trying to be brave. Thomas managed a weak smile. She asked me to tell you she's sorry she can't come draw elephants. Tell her I'm practicing, Daniel said, so I can show her when she's better. Catherine appeared in the doorway. Thomas, you should be at the hospital. Visiting hours ended. They kicked me out. He rubbed his face. I couldn't go home to an empty apartment. I just needed to be around people who, he stopped. Who care about you, Catherine finished softly. Thomas looked at her, and something passed between them. Something that had been building for weeks, unspoken, but undeniable. "Stay for dinner," Catherine said. "Please. You need to eat." They sat together in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, but the actual kitchen where Catherine hadn't eaten in months. She made pasta, badly, and Thomas helped, and Daniel wheeled himself in to supervise. For an hour, they pretended everything was normal. They laughed at Catherine's cooking, told stories, acted like a family instead of an employer, an employee, and a client. After dinner, Daniel wheeled himself closer to Thomas. "Sophie is going to be okay. I know she is." "How do you know?" "Because she has you. And you don't give up on people. You didn't give up on your wife. You didn't give up on me. You won't give up on her." Thomas's eyes filled. "Thank you, Daniel." That night, after Thomas left, Catherine stood at Daniel's door. "He's a good man." "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "Mom, are you in love with him?" Catherine nearly choked. "What?" "No. I mean, we barely know each other. You look at him the way Dad used to look at you. Before everything went bad." Catherine's marriage had ended 2 years before the accident, a casualty of her ambition and her ex-husband's resentment. She told herself she didn't have time for love anymore. "It's complicated," she said finally. "It doesn't have to be," Daniel replied with teenage wisdom. "He makes you smile. You make him less sad. Sophia, and I think you should just admit you like each other." "You and Sophia discussed this?" "We're kids. We notice stuff." Daniel grinned. "Just saying." Sophia's surgery took 6 hours. Catherine sat with Thomas in the waiting room, holding his hand when he couldn't hold himself together, bringing him coffee he didn't drink, simply being present. When the surgeon finally emerged, Thomas stood on shaking legs. "The surgery went well," Dr. Martinez said. "She's in recovery. She'll need monitoring, but the prognosis is excellent." Thomas collapsed back into the chair, sobbing with relief. Catherine's own tears fell freely as she wrapped her arms around him. "She's okay," Catherine whispered. "Your little girl is okay." 2 weeks later, Sophia was home, recovering with strict activity restrictions, but otherwise healthy. Thomas brought her to the Hayes house, where Daniel had prepared a welcome home banner with his increasingly steady hands. "You drew elephants," Sophia exclaimed, delighted. "Told you I'd practice," Daniel said, grinning. While the kids settled in the living room, Thomas and Catherine stood on the terrace overlooking the city. "I owe you everything," Thomas said quietly. "You owe me nothing. You gave me my son back. This was just returning the favor." "It's more than that." Thomas turned to her. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost. Hope. The belief that good people still exist." "You show me the same thing," Catherine replied. "Showed me what actually matters. What I've been missing while chasing success." Thomas reached for her hand, tentative. "Catherine, I don't know where this is going between us, but I know I want to find out." "So do I," she admitted, lacing her fingers through his. From inside, they heard Sophia's laughter and Daniel's answering chuckle. 2 children, connected by circumstance and genuine affection, building something neither parent had expected. "We're a mess," Thomas observed. 2 single parents, complicated histories, children who need us. "The best things usually are messy," Catherine said. "Look at our kids." Thomas smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "Yeah, look at them." 6 months later, Daniel took 4 steps unassisted. Catherine and Thomas stood on either side, hands outstretched but not touching him, letting him find his own balance. When he stumbled on the 5th step, they caught him together, and the 4 of them, Daniel, Catherine, Thomas, and Sophia, collapsed into a laughing, crying, celebrating heap on the therapy mat. "I did it," Daniel gasped. "I actually did it." "You did it," Thomas confirmed, his voice thick with pride. Catherine looked at this beautiful, broken, healing family they'd built from loss and chance and stubborn hope. They weren't traditional. They weren't simple, but they were real, and they were hers. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.